Viridian, The Green Guide, by Clouds. My Head in the Clouds, Not Coming Down. Read by Shadow 5. Chapter 25. Fight. Summary. Izuku goes out as a vigilante for the first time since he broke his arm. Shota watched as some cops dragged away the mugger he'd just taken down, then used his capture weapon to pull himself up onto the rooftops to look for more problems. He wondered if Viridian would call him today before dismissing the thought. He didn't have to talk to the problem child every night. It's not like he was the kid's dad or anything. He was just about to jump onto the next rooftop when he felt something small and hard bounce off the back of his head. Immediately, he activated his quirk and whirled around, gripping his capture weapon in preparation to deal with whatever threat had managed to sneak up on him, only to see the damn problem child, smiling brightly and waving at him with a goddamn broken arm.
Kid, is your arm broken?
Okay, so that probably wasn't the best thing to say, considering that the cast was fairly obvious, but sue him, it was the first time he'd seen the kid in over a month, and he shows up with an obvious injury. Of course Shota had the right to be a little shocked. And what was the kid doing out with a broken arm? At least the kid had the decency to look embarrassed. Not anymore. At least, I don't think. The kid tugged on his sleeve in a belated attempt to hide the cast from you. It should be pretty much healed by now. But don't worry, I'm not actually planning on getting into any fights tonight, but, we need to go so that you can get into a fight. Shota sighed heavily.
Lead the way, problem child.
The kid smiled and took off. In his defense, Izuku hadn't been looking for a mugging. He'd been planning on finding Eraser first thing, but then he'd heard a scream and he couldn't just leave it alone. Oh, well, you just have to talk to Eraser about the bee after the fight. Thankfully, because they'd been looking for him in the first place, the mugging wasn't that far from where he'd found Eraserhead, so it didn't take long at all for them to reach it. He was about to jump down onto the street out of habit when Eraser glared at him.
Stay put, problem child.
Izuku laughed sheepishly. I, wasn't going to join the fight? Eraser simply looked at him with a tight skepticism, and Izuku could almost feel him rolling his eyes behind his goggles, but he just sighed and jumped down to take care of the villain. Izuku got out his notebook and started scribbling down the different techniques that he used, most of which Izuku was familiar with from watching previous fights. There was only one guy, and he was obviously a little drunk, so it didn't take long at all for Eraser to take him down and restrain him. Wait. Now that the villain was restrained, the cops would probably be coming soon to take him in, and Izuku probably shouldn't still be there when they came, seeing as how he was a vigilante and all. Izuku put his notebook back in his pocket and stood to leave, only to be wrapped in Eraser's capture weapon before he could jump to the next roof. He looked up at Eraser, who was glaring at him with his quirk activated.
Go home, problem child.
Izuku couldn't help pouting like a petulant child. I've hardly left my house in 5 weeks, Eraser. I'm going stir-crazy.
Running around with a broken arm is irrational,
Eraser countered. I've only been outside like 3 times in the last month, Izuku pleaded. Now that he was actually out and running around, he didn't want to go back home. And one of those was to go to the grocery store, so it doesn't even count. Please, just let me have this. Eraser simply tightened his capture weapon slightly.
Do I need to escort you home?
I'm a vigilante, remember? Izuku pointed out. I've got a secret identity to protect. Where was all this confidence coming from? Since when did he get so comfortable with Eraserhead to... Was this sass? Or were they just arguing? Either way, Izuku wasn't used to acting this way with anyone, much less with an adult. Maybe it had something to do with the fact that Eraserhead missed him when he disappeared, or the fact that he actually seemed to care about what happened to him, even if their care manifested in a protectiveness for his broken arm. But, oddly enough, Eraser didn't seem to mind it. He wasn't getting mad at Izuku for backtalking him like his teachers would. He wasn't blowing up like Kachan would. He was just taking it in stride, like this was how Izuku was supposed to act toward him. It was weird. Eraser was still holding him tightly, and Izuku knew he probably wouldn't let go until he promised to head straight home. Well, Izuku could probably use the sleep, considering that he'd been up all night researching the... Oh, Izuku had forgotten that he still needed to tell Eraser what he'd learned about the bee. And he had so many questions about that rash of instant villains in Naruhata. If he was correct, Eraser had been involved with those ones too. Fine, he said finally. I'll go home and rest, but only if you answer some of my questions. Shota rolled his eyes, but nodded and unwrapped his capture weapon. This kid was going to be the death of him. Going out and looking for fights with a broken arm? He had zero sense of self-preservation, which Shota probably should have expected, considering that the kid was likely suicidal, but it was one thing to theorize about it and another entirely to see it in action. The only comforting thing about this whole situation was that, looking at the timeline of Viridian's disappearance, he probably went off the grid because of his arm, not his depression. And he was acting more confident than usual, so maybe the break had been good for him. Viridian's eyes lit up. I want to know more about the instant villains. Shota's eyes widened. Where did she learn that term? Did I mention it? Viridian shook his head. No, I was just looking up stuff, because there have been a couple times that groups of people have gotten dosed with Trigger, but I never actually saw them shoot up. I ended up going to the place where the group last night got dosed, and I found this. The kid dug in his hoodie pocket for a moment before pulling out a Ziploc bag and handing over. Shota looked at him in confusion, then looked at the bag and his blood ran cold. A tiny, mechanical bee. He'd considered the possibility that Queen Bee could be involved in this, but he'd hoped that they'd succeeded in destroying all the bees after that whole fiasco with Popstop. But apparently not. It belongs to a villain named Queen Bee, who was heavily involved with the instant villain incidents a few years ago in Naruhata. Viridian frowned. Well, I don't actually have to tell you that, considering that I'm pretty sure you were in the case back then. Wait, were you in the case back then? I'm so sorry for assuming, and... Viridian's insecurities were back. Shota cut him off before the kid could work himself into a panic. Yeah, I was part of that investigation. In fact, I still am. That's why I'm one of the heroes tracking Trigger. Viridian sighed in relief. Okay, good. So, anyway, once I found the bee, then it was pretty easy to trace back to Naruhata. Were the victims back then random, or were they picked for any specific reason? They were random, Shota responded. Well, some of them annoyed the host or bought the drugs to get high, but most of them were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. That's what I thought. Viridian pinched his lower lip in thought. And of those instant villains, a few disappeared after the incident, only to return as the modified next-level villains, right? Shota nodded. Viridian sighed. That's what I was worried about. The bees have orders to target any random citizen as long as they're loaded with the drug. Wait, what? The kid had managed to lose him. How do you know what the orders are? The kid looked surprised. Oh, I hacked it. Shota had to have heard that wrong. You hacked the bee? It's Square created. How did you hack into it? Viridian shrugged. Well, I knew that it'd have to have some way of communicating with the Queen when it was alive, and since it seems to have the characteristics of a robot, I assumed that it was communicating wirelessly. Honestly, it was just a lucky guess. Shota grinned. Knowing the bees could be hacked could be a game-changer. What did you find, kid? Well, most of the files were corrupted when the bee was destroyed. Viridian frowned. Or maybe it has more to do with being cut off from the hive? Well, anyway, I was able to view its directive file, which basically ordered it to target anyone. I'm just concerned because the last time this happened, well, you know, I don't have to tell you because you were there and... The kid was mumbling again. Problem child. Viridian flinched, then took a deep breath. The last time there was an outbreak of instant villains like this, whoever was behind it seemed to be looking for candidates for next-level villains. But the thing is, it's been months since this started in Musutafu, and we should have seen at least one next-level villain by now if they follow their old pattern. But what if next-level villains aren't the ultimate goal, and they're moving on to the next phase of their experiments?
Shota swallowed. Then there's a possibility that these victims are in danger. And when they came back...
They'll be permanently modified and even more dangerous, Viridian followed. I have a theory that they're most likely trying to permanently strengthen a person's quirk, but it's just a theory. I know that it's probably not feasible to put every instant villain under police protection, but if you just knew the kinds of quirks they were looking for, then... The kid was digging too deep. Shota didn't know who exactly was behind the villain factory. He was still really skeptical of the whole Alpha One myth, but he knew they were powerful enough to kidnap a witness out of a police interrogation room. Viridian was a teenager. A smart teenager. A teenager with a death wish and zero sense of self-preservation, but a teenager nonetheless. However valuable the kid's investigation was, his involvement was going to catch the attention of all the wrong people and put him in danger. He had to put a stop to this.
Kid,
he cut off Viridian's ramblings.
I need you to stop looking into this, okay?
Viridian looked at him in confusion. Why?
You're meddling in things you have no way to understand, Shota said. If you don't drop this, you're only going to put yourself in danger.
But if I can protect people...
No!
Viridian flinched at his yell. Shota cursed softly. He shouldn't have done that. The kid obviously had some trauma, and him yelling wasn't going to help the kid trust him at all. He forced himself to take a deep breath.
Viridian, you're a kid. You should be worrying about going to the mall with friends, not about drug rings and kidnappings.
Viridian was silent for a long moment. I never had friends to worry about. Before Shota could apologize or ask what he meant by that, the kid ran and jumped onto the next roof, and disappeared into the shadows. Shota could only hope that he actually went home like he'd promised. That was chapter 25 of Viridian the Green Guide. I hope you guys enjoyed this one, and I'll see you all next time. Bye! Hey, outtakes!
Kid. Deep. Kid, is your arm...
Why did that sound so wrong? But it's just a theory. A game theory, sorry.